My name is Elizabeth Langeveldt. I'm the current president of the Australian Law Librarians Association, and at the moment I work in a large private law firm. But I've also worked at UTS and in the Australian government, so I've got a pretty broad range of experience. Just to talk a little bit about the background of the Australian Law Librarians Association, because it's not terribly well known, I think, and we'd like to make it better known. We affectionately call it ALA.
Sorry, you?
We affectionately call it ALA, makes it a little bit easier to say. ALA is a not-for-profit organisation, so it's registered with the ACNC. It has a national body and 6 divisions, so New South Wales, ACT, Victoria, South Australia, WA and NT. We don't have a formal division in Queensland or Tasmania, but we do have members right across Australia. Membership numbers are in fluctuation. I think, we've seen a bit of a downturn in membership over the last year or so, which kind of reflects the market, I think, and what's going on in law, and not only in private practice but government and so on generally, where there's some contraction in library services Australia-wide. So unfortunately we're seeing membership numbers shrink a little bit. As I said, we are not-for-profit. We've got limited sources of revenue. So our main sources of revenue are our membership dues. We publish a journal, the Australian Law Librarian, where we source articles from a very broad range of contributors. It's certainly not limited to people who are members. We get contributions from overseas organisations. So we have affiliations with the British and Irish Association of Law Librarians, the American Association of Law Librarians, the International Federation of Library Associations and so on. We are also quite strongly associated with the peak body in Australia, which is ALIA, the Australian Library and Information Association. So we try and network as much as possible. In fact, that's one of our primary objectives. So just to recap on, so we get journal subscriptions. We also run a biannual conference, so we get sponsorship from various legal publishers for that, and also people pay to attend, and so they're our main sources of revenue, along with advertising in our journal and now in our newsletter. So we're always keen to find new sources of revenue, of course, as is everybody these days. So the main purpose of our organisation is networking, professional development for our members. So we do that by running our own professional development courses, both at national and at divisional level, and we've implemented technology for us to be able to do that remotely. As we've been hearing this morning, there's quite a bit of interest in distance education, but we try to provide as much face-to-face networking opportunities as we can as well. And advocacy, we obviously want to advocate for our members, and we're trying to do more of that. So that would be my opening statement.
Thank you. What is happening to law libraries around Australia?
Okay. Well, as I just said, we have seen a bit of a contraction in our membership, and that's reflected by the fact that various bodies are downsizing the number of staff, and that's a factor of funding, but also the interplay between the cost of materials and the cost of staff, and perhaps how that's perceived. And I think there's always been an issue of perception in terms of staffing costs being seen as a bit of a money sink, perhaps, which is not necessarily the case, but is so perception of value, but also the fact that you're seeing a lot more collections go towards the online, and so therefore that will impinge on the need for staffing for some of the manual handling and things like that. So you would see a decrease in what we call paraprofessional activities like library technicians and so on. So we've definitely seen a decrease there. But also because, and one of the questions that was postulated to me before was about whether the lawyer themselves the end user would take the place of a librarian, in a sense, do a lot of that work themselves.
Do you think that's happening?
Well, we do see a degree of that, and of course that is going to happen because if you're downsizing your staff, then you're going to have to do more of the work yourself, whether you're getting a good return on investment and whether you're getting the best use of your time in doing that is questionable. So I would see that, if you could brief a librarian to find the information for you, then you would be getting a very good outcome generally. And one of the things that I would talk about is that, a good librarian would know the business very well. So in terms of developing the skill set, you would see that librarians would want to dovetail with the business and know the business or the practice very well, depending on, what it is, so that they could source and find information for the lawyers.
How do you see the future for law librarians and law libraries?
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and I think one of the things that sort of prompted my attendance here was the article in Lawyers Weekly, which is about more firms going to a open plan. So one of the things we have seen in a number of areas is that the physical library has been disbanded, and I actually supplied one of the articles I supplied to you with the background materials was about one large firm who's gone to this model of embedded librarians. So they basically work, and there's no physical library per se in the firm I work in. That's very much the same. It's very much an online library. So that's one end of the pendulum. I think there's other firms that I've been to where they still have a physical library and they still have a number of staff. So there's a very broad spectrum of what's available, but I think there is a greater push to online, but that does affect how you can interact with your clients and what services you're able to offer. So obviously greater ratio of staff and a physical collection means you can offer services in a particular way. Also, that if there's no library space, that does impinge on the fact that people cannot necessarily meet and collaborate perhaps in the same way that they used to. Some firms you might see that there's very limited space for doing that. And other firms, again, there's still a footprint. So it's very hard to paint a picture of, a generic librarian. I do think that they need a number of skills, and we've seen this coming out in the conversations this morning that people do need the technological skills. They need business skills. They need to be able to educate their clients, so who would be the lawyers, to get the best out of the information products that they're using. For instance, I work by myself, so I need to be a bit of all of those things. I've got a master's degree in adult education, so I've had quite a bit of experience in training, but I also think that I would be better suited as well by having more business skills, so that you can use those to make good choices and informed choices about what you're purchasing. Because where I work, we actually have we put a lot of money into information resources, so it's quite a big budgetary chunk to have to manage, and you want to be able to get a really strong outcome for that. So that's what I would think that people would benefit by.
So you're saying that the skill sets of librarians are changing to be more adaptable and to fit more comfortably within the business operation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not that so much that that's not ever been the case. I think it has been the case, but I think we're seeing that continuum of people needing to be more integrated in the business, to be more involved with the day-to-day running of the business, and to be also to be supportive of not only the lawyers but the various business units, depending on where you are. That might include marketing or business development or knowledge management, human resources, those kinds of things. So there's definitely a strong role for librarians in that, and what I'm doing is I'm really hanging on to that that nomenclature. I mean, we see different people called different things in different roles, whether they're information specialists or... I don't have a problem with being called a librarian. I'm very proud to be called a librarian, and I'd like to see people develop their understanding of what librarians are and what they can do. So, you know, I'm glad that we've still got that term and we still use it and we advocate for it.
I'm glad you are too. I only know the terms librarian or library, so at least we're on the same page. Questions?
It's been a long time since I've been in private practice, it's about 20 years, and I remember when I was a young practitioner, I would always get the research job, and I'd go down to the library at Phillips Fox in Western Australia where I worked at the time, and there'd be 10 article clerks in the library, and we'd all be doing research. And now in my in-house role, if I need to do some research, I've got about a 5-minute attention span online, and if I can't get the answer that quickly, I'll give it to an external law firm. I'm very interested in this paper that you circulated to us, the one from the American Association of Law Libraries about negotiations in law libraries. I must say that the librarians that I worked with some 20 years ago, nothing like this. I wonder if I could invite you to speak to that.
It's interesting because I've just... that's one of the things that we do a lot of, and I think we need to do a lot better. And I'm glad you touched on that because that's probably something that I didn't pick up on, even though I've just read a book by a former FBI hostage negotiator called Never Split the Difference. Fantastic book, can recommend it to anybody. Negotiation is what we do a lot of, and I think we do need to get better at it. The bigger the sums are that are involved in running library services, the more that you need to be aware of what you can do to get the business the best return for its investment. Also, that one of the things that we used to have in the library is this thing called the Monash Index for serials, whereas there was a kind of given set number each year by which your serials budget would increase. And we've kind of working that down over time. But if you've got an online subscription to something, it is a given that that will increase by a certain amount every year. So not only do you have inside the business probably pressures on budget that you're needing to negotiate extra money, but you've got pressures dealing with the publishers where you've got to try and get the best results. So you've got that tension between the management that you're dealing with and the external relations that you've got with publishing, and I think negotiation skills are very important.
And that would be one of your biggest value adds, I imagine, how you demonstrate to the business, is it not?
Yeah, we do work very hard, and one of the things that we've got, coming into the conference is we have all the publishers there, so people can talk to them, build relationships with them. We have relationships going over years with the publishers so that we can try and... So that it's not just going in as a cold business case every year, actually dealing with people that you know well and can relate to, and they know that, that we're going to treat them well and that we've got an ongoing relationship with them and we want to continue that.
So in that context, even though practitioners may be doing their own research online, I imagine that there's still very much a role for a law librarian going forward at a very minimum in that space.
Look, there is a role in that space. There is a role in... There's always going to be a role in information sourcing. We have our networks that we use to support each other. Now, for instance... Sydney Law Librarians have a group called Sterling, and we have our internal interlibrary loaning service so that we can actually exchange articles. Now, the problem with online means that if you've got particular licenses, you actually can't do that. So that is impinging our ability to swap information, but we do it where we can. We support each other. That's an access to a whole network of people that would be unavailable otherwise. But even I find the most tech-savvy, knowledgeable partners, and there are many, do approach me from time to time for things that they can't achieve themselves. There will always be a need for those information intermediaries for a variety of purposes.